Hey there, my name is Jake Curl. Today I'm going to be giving you my capstone project presentation over the company of ConocoPhillips. A quick agenda of what we will be going through today. Quickly, I'm going to introduce myself and why I chose ConocoPhillips. Then we're going to be talking about slightly the industry, helping to create some context as to what ConocoPhillips has been doing to move forward in the Fortune 100 company list. From there, after that context, I will explain what ConocoPhillips has done to contribute to society as an energy company, as well as analyzation and comments about what I think ConocoPhillips should be doing moving forward. So demonstration to the board members, and then concluding with some questions that I would answer at the end. So the introduction being, my name is Jake Curl. As I said, I'm going to be graduating with a Bachelor's of Science in Business and Bible with a concentration of leadership here in about 2 or 3 weeks. This summer I had the opportunity to intern at ChampionX, an oil and gas company, and that is what inspired me to want to look into ConocoPhillips. I was very intrigued by the oil and gas industry and how it offers energy to the energy industry as well. And while I'm aspiring to the full-time vocational ministry, I thought it was very interesting and awesome opportunity to work this summer with ChampionX. So looking at the oil and gas industry, which provides energy for people to a daily use. This is what the market is currently in the oil and gas industry, being that per person, there's about 279 millionth of a British thermal unit. How that is gauged, it is a fancy way of saying how much energy a person needs to be able to drive their car, live in a home, get to work, to make food, to do the basic commodities a day. Unfortunately, as time has gone on, this thermal unit has only increased per person over time significantly within the last 4 years specifically. 80% of energy used in a daily occurrence is by fossil fuels. And while that is great that we have the crude oil industry, the oil and gas industry, to be able to provide that energy globally, through the Paris Agreement, many organizations have come together to agree that reducing emissions will help our environment long term, as well as renewable energy sources led by electrification will be best for energy productivity, diversifying that percentage of 80% being only crude oil. Additionally, as we see crude oil, we know how important it is and how valuable it is. And we see in this chart that the price had skyrocketed in 2022, meeting what we would see a peak. Today it has gone down to $71 per barrel, and we would suspect that it does not peak again, assuming that around the world, companies and organizations are able to meet the emission reduction and renewable resource diversity that they are hoping to reach by 2050. What ConocoPhillips is doing to be able to contribute to this emission goal is specifically as an up and midstream organization. Those are fancy terms in the oil and gas industry. Essentially, Scope 1 emissions. That's upstream oil production. The emissions directly from the oil being produced by ConocoPhillips, as well as Scope 2 emissions being the indirect. So that's midstream, how it's being utilized in a daily occurrence, how it's getting to where it needs to, the indirect effects of oil emissions or energy emissions, being carbon and whatnot. Both of those scopes, ConocoPhillips is looking to reduce by 50 to 60% by 2030, and of course, because of that Paris Agreement, globally get to net zero. Scope 3 is a downstream, which is refinement of oil. ConocoPhillips does not participate in that within the oil and gas industry, which is why they have no contribution, as you see on the screen, to reducing Scope 3 emissions, or at least aren't very clear about it. Now, what has ConocoPhillips been doing specifically within the oil and gas industry to help essentially move themselves forward in the Fortune 100 company list amidst what the industry is facing right now? Well, Well, ConocoPhillips is focused on 4 specific aspects of their business plan, and I'm grateful that Dallas Christian College had offered classes that helped me see these things while researching and learning about ConocoPhillips. The first of these aspects that I want to talk about are objectives. Short, mid, and long-term objectives is something that any organization and company should have. For ConocoPhillips right now, the long-term objective, similar to any other organization, is to meet net zero emissions. This is a government regulation enacted to all. However, the way that they are going to do that through short and midterm goals, communication is needed, especially with ConocoPhillips being a global organization. Management communication is important not only internally to know what the company should be doing moving forward, but also to customers and stakeholders, being able to communicate what those objectives are to receive support outside of the company. Tech choices being innovative technology to move towards renewable energy. Renewable products are a lot different than crude oil projects, and this would require a new set of eyes, fresh ideas, meaning that leadership styles are going to need to change from what they have been in decades past. As the oil industry has boomed, it seems that now oil and gas has been strictly turned into energy, that the oil and gas industry is being turned into an energy industry. Therefore, leadership styles are needed differently. Portfolio choices. ConocoPhillips, as well as any other oil and gas organization, because of this transition moving forward, are going to need to make choices that are ethical. Not having strong ethical decision may actually diminish their popularity, may prevent them from having stakeholders, customers, other companies who want to partner with them. This could be prevented if the right choices aren't made through diversification of a portfolio. That if the wrong companies are being partnered with, the wrong choices are being made, then moving forward, they will not gain the support necessary for cutting the emissions the way that ConocoPhillips wants to. Ethics must be taken into account, as well as external engagement with other companies outside, this meaning business. At the end of the day, ConocoPhillips is looking to thrive, and that means they need strong revenue numbers. And being in the Fortune 100 list, it is clear that not only have they contributed a large amount of energy to the U.S., but they also have gained a great amount of revenue. And so it's important that accounting and aspects of numbers are looked to continuously to see what needs to be, what decisions need to be made for them to improve those numbers. But of course, behind a good business plan is a strategic plan, the ultimate goal, which is to benefit people. Cobb's values are that it is able to have an environment that not only helps its employees, but helps people. That's what an energy company is all about, supplying the energy necessary for daily life. And so for ConocoPhillips, one thing that they have done, unlike any other company, is make the main goal pinpointing stakeholders, meaning their main goal is for finances, not necessarily to create an innovative technology, but to give back to those that have invested into their product. And that seems pretty logical, and yet ConocoPhillips is known as the people's company, that they seem to be the only oil giant within the commercial organization, or being a commercial organization within the industry, to be able to provide for stakeholders. We know this because of their strong returns of product to the stakeholders, as we're about to see in the next slide of financials, how significant that percentage is giving back to stakeholders. But this ultimately is what has distinguished them apart from any other oil giant. And this is what has been able to stabilize them financially, fighting as they move up the list in the Fortune 100 company list. Here are those financials that I was telling you about. ConocoPhillips, if you look at the revenue numbers in the millions, initially these numbers are large, but comparatively to other oil and gas giants such as ExxonMobil, making up to 200,000 or more, and by 200,000 I mean 200 million in revenue yearly, while ConocoPhillips peaked in 2022 with 78 million. Again, this is because their focus not necessarily is cash on hand having revenue, but what they're actually able to turn their revenue into giving back the stakeholders. This is why their debt to equity ratio is constantly increasing, as that is what they're looking for, seeing how in their cash flow they can give 51% of that revenue actually back to stakeholders, improving their product continuously. Furthermore, from this research, I saw that ExxonMobil, while making over $200 million a year, was only able to give 5.5% of their gross income invested into returns, while ConocoPhillips of their gross income was 21% given back. And so this just shows that their return on equity and their return on assets is significantly larger and greater, in some aspects even double compared to other companies. This is what they highlight. Giving back to stakeholders, it is what has distinguished them and ultimately what has helped them thrive within the oil and gas industry. A SWOT analysis, as we just described, the strength being their stakeholder relationships. Their return on equity and assets is what clearly distinguishes them from any other oil giant. Furthermore, their weaknesses is that they do not utilize their cash on hand efficiently. Instead, they react to problems because they spend so much of their revenue and gross income giving back to stakeholders. An example of them having no cash on hand is the Willow project that they have had passed in Alaska. ConocoPhillips owns the most leases and it is essentially the face of Alaska in terms of oil and gas. However, when a problem arises, everybody in the world knows whose pipeline that is. And so when a problem occurs, ConocoPhillips has to react instead of being proactive with their cash on hand. Opportunities are these greenhouse gas emissions that everyone is looking to cut. The reality is ConocoPhillips has failed between 2005 and 2019 in convincing the people that they truly are on their way of cutting emissions through firm phone calls. It was noted that ConocoPhillips, through 6 core questions, failed to be pro-climate and in fact anti-climate, which is why the opportunity to gain popularity is there, but it also becomes a threat that emission regulations constantly changing throughout the entire world. If they are not watchful, they in one instance can be on the opportunity side of the greenhouse gas emissions, doing the right things. As a global and commercial organization, they're able to slate in new ways and new objectives of meeting those opportunities, gaining popularity, but at the same time, if they're not watchful and are a little slow in reacting to the new regulations, it could be a threat to the organization and their popularity. Overall, ConocoPhillips is going the right direction, but there's 3 things I want to be able to offer to the board members that I think ConocoPhillips should be focusing on. Those 3 things being, I think ConocoPhillips needs to have more cash on hand. Popularity and relationship with stakeholders is something that they are really passionate about. However, instead of giving 51%, I think they need to be giving 30% back to stakeholders and taking that additional 20%, having a cash on hand. Personally, I think, especially moving forward, as I expressed with those opportunities for gas emissions, if they are going to really seriously cut those, they cannot react anymore to pipeline problems, to simple things. They need to be able to be proactive and make a staple point, and they need to do that with their revenue cash on hand. I believe they need to dedicate one specific project. Currently, they have wind turbines offshore with a cable connecting to onshore connection projects. It's not enough energy. And I think what ConocoPhillips needs to do is they need to cut their losses. They need to stop putting in little objective slates here and there, and they need to create a project that they are dedicated on. That means that they're going to need to hire some new mechanical engineers as opposed to petroleum engineers. But again, they should not associate themselves with greenwashing. All aspects of one product should be aimed to renewable resources, cutting emissions. Even if it reduces revenue now, it will improve it over time. And of course, they merged with Marathon Oil, a downstream organization. I think that they need to be more strategic about who they're going to do partnership with, who they can merge with. If they can find a risky, grit-driven organization, I think they will move their way up the Fortune 100 list, increasing their revenue, helping point number 1 and 2. At the end of the day, ConocoPhillips is a commercial organization within the oil and gas industry. It provides affordable energy, giving constantly back to stakeholders, but I think that if they are going to be moving forward with renewable resources and cutting emissions, big moves need to be made. Their revenue is low, and they need to find a way to improve it quickly so that they can make a staple point and objective within the oil and gas industry. Two questions I think I would be asked is, why does COP treat stakeholders so highly? And it's because if they didn't, they wouldn't be on the list. Truly, we saw those revenue numbers, and I believe that if ConocoPhillips failed to have a relationship with stakeholders, they wouldn't be in the position that they are now in the Fortune 100 company list. If comp is moving towards renewable energy, will it see revenue continue to decrease? Unfortunately, I think they have hit their peak, and from now on for the next decade, I think they're going to have some pretty low revenue numbers. However, I believe if they take my suggestion of investing in the one specific renewable resource project that will generate revenue over time in the near future, that it will be a worthwhile investment. But yes, they will be losing revenue over time given how their company is positioned. That is my presentation over ConocoPhillips, and thank you very much for listening. Hope that you have a blessed day.